Well, I'm pleased to introduce this second session of the afternoon on innovation and efficiency in evidence generation. And today this panel is going to be moderated, I was going to say modified, no, she's going to moderate the panel, Jennifer Kerr, President Cook Medical. Jennifer has been involved in clinical research and regulatory affairs for 20 years. She is currently the president of Cook Research Incorporated, which is involved in product development, testing, clinical studies, medical scientific writing, and regulatory submissions. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer to moderate this panel, and I'll let Jennifer introduce the rest of the group.
Thank you. Our speaker is Chip Hance, and very fortunate for him to be here and to share some of the different projects that MDIC has been working on. And then once Chip has finished that, we'll begin our conversation with the panel members.
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, hello, everybody. Boy, we are late in the day, aren't we? So we're going to, I think we can have a really stimulating conversation. I'm really glad to be here. Just by way of introduction, I'm a 25-year veteran of the medical device industry, and 5 years ago, I spent nearly a year working at FDA as an entrepreneur in residence, trying to simplify the clinical trials process together with Owen here on this panel, and with Katie O'Callahan and a number of others, trying to simplify the efficiency of an IDE approval. And I've had a passion about these kinds of topics of clinical trial science for some number of years, and as a result, I've been the board champion for the clinical trial science group for the last, I guess, year and a half or so. I don't think I've been as excited about what we've got going on as today. I've been coming to these public forums, I think this is my third year now, and I think this time we actually have more exciting, tangible projects and forums to get involved with than ever before. And for those of you either on the phone listening in or here in the room, success with my talk today would be a large number of you coming forward to say that you're interested in being part of some of these demonstration projects that we have going on, because we're really at a cusp and could use more participation in what we're trying to do. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit about our projects, and probably a lot of this is familiar territory. So first of all, I think anybody who's decided to come to this session would appreciate how important clinical trials are and the role they play in the product development process. And this is one of many different paradigms that describes the development of medical devices, from ideation through preclinical, through clinical, through regulatory processes, and post-approval data collection. But I think many of you would agree that the clinical trials aspect of that can be one of the most critical factors, and that when it works well, it's like this bicycle here, where this complex machine with many moving parts moves together and is an efficient fashion to deliver an output. But more often than not, it looks something like this. It looks like silos in the farm fields, where there are many, many, many different stakeholders involved with clinical research. The processes are very, very complex, and many of the constituencies work in different silos and find it difficult to work across that. And so you've got this ecosystem that makes it extremely challenging to drive process improvement overall. And that's what we've been trying to do, is how do you break this apart and really influence the ecosystem going forward. So, our idea in this area has been to pick specific areas and try and do demonstration projects that would catalyze improvements in a specific area. And then I'll talk at the end about how this might ultimately evolve into some specific things or bigger, more loftier goals. But you know, our thought is that our work on early feasibility studies, on the virtual patient methodology, on collaborations with private payers, that these are demonstration projects that show how the different silos in this ecosystem can come together and collaboratively make a significant amount of process improvement going forward. So I'm going to start with one that's very near and dear to me because I've spent a lot of time over the last year working on early feasibility studies. And I'm going to show you a little bit of data. This is actually the first time that some of this data has come to be about. And it may not look that significant, but this is, as far as I know, the first time in the history of medical device clinical studies that we've been able to bring 13 sponsors of studies, early feasibility studies, a number of people here in this room, their companies contribute to this, and put together a consolidated data set of what the performance of a clinical study actually was and how it was conducted. Not the results, but how the actual study conduct actually occurred of this. So this is a first in the history of the medical device industry to my knowledge. So we were actually able to get 13 sponsors of early feasibility studies ran in the last 2.5 years. And this sample data set of 13 different studies represents about 25% of the early feasibility studies run in the United States during this particular period of time. And we were able to collect the data on how quickly did they achieve an IDE protocol approval through the FDA process. And you can see the largest fraction did it in less than 60 days. We were able to collect across the 43 different sites that participated in that early feasibility study. How long did it take to get an IRB approval? And you can see the majority of the sites were able to, again, do that in 60 days. But more importantly, we were able to diagnose one of the real problem areas and quantitatively point to what the problems were. So this is that same metric of how long it actually took for a site and a sponsor to agree contractually how to conduct the study. And you can see you know, more than a third of the studies take 4 months or longer, sometimes more than 6 months, between a sponsor and a site to agree on the contractual terms to initiate the study conduct. And so this has become one of the major barriers to actually performing an early feasibility study, or frankly, all clinical research. And we've been able to pull together a different working group. You can see some of our members here, led by a clinical site that is actually working on specific contractual language that both clinical sites and sponsors can agree to, and actually short-circuit this process so that it can be done in some 60 days. We're spending some time beginning tomorrow in the cardiovascular arena with the idea of a clinical site consortium, sites that would commit to expedited contracting, expedited IRB reviews, and expedited patient enrollment in a study, in an early feasibility study. So this, I think, just could be a beginning, a demonstration of how the different silos in this space might actually collaboratively work together. Another project that we're working on is titled Virtual Patient. But what it really is novel statistical methodologies to be able to take data that has been collected in an alternative arena, perhaps in an international market arena or in a previous device version, and allow it to be, in a statistically valid fashion, be combined with an existing data set to reduce the number of patients within a pivotal study and to simplify and speed the actual pivotal study conduct in the United States. And this has the benefit of reducing, you know, maybe 25 to 50% of the total number of patients that would need to be enrolled in a study overall. At this point, we've developed some key tools. We've run a number of, we've published in a number of peer review journals. We've done a couple conference presentations, and we've got a couple prospective studies now going through the FDA in collaboration for how those might actually go forward. So a very exciting project, has the potential to reduce the number of patients in a clinical study to be more efficient going forward. And then a third area, a demonstration project that we've been interested in doing, and thanks to Naomi for her participation in this particular area. But we've, recently the FDA announced that private payers would have a vehicle to collaborate with a sponsor and provide input to the pivotal study design that was being proposed by a sponsor. And this is kind of a novel idea for sponsors to think that a private payer might actually comment on their study design. Usually it's a very confidential two-way process exclusively with the FDA. So, one of the things that we wanted to see if it could happen is, could we retrospectively create a forum to collaborate and look at past studies that have been done, and what might the private payer input be to that study design to enable to maybe take some of the intimidation for sponsors out of the process if they saw that maybe it's not so difficult to actually incorporate that, and that we might have more interest from sponsors in collaborating in this particular fashion. Since we got going on this on a cardiac resynchronization therapy effort, we've had two major sponsors come forward privately and offer up additional studies that could be part of this collaborative process and discussed in a open forum as to how private payer input might go into that. So hopefully that gives you a sense for some of the projects that we're working on. Again, they're demonstration projects trying to target specific areas in a way that might be transformative going overall. And our idea here is to create these forums to break down the silos and work in a more efficient fashion collaboratively across the entire ecosystem. So one thing I was asked is, okay, so where might all this lead? And what are we actually trying to accomplish here in clinical trial science? And the best way I could frame it was with these 5 bullet points here. So imagine that the medical device clinical research operating environment was actually a learning environment, and that was constantly improving in its efficiency with real process improvement that would provide better studies and more efficient studies with less duplication. If we could create that kind of learning environment with the right constituency, that might really be a game changer for how medical device clinical research is done in the United States. Imagine that we could reduce the duplication of global clinical research through novel study designs and statistical methodologies. So, if you wouldn't have to run a study in Europe, and that wouldn't count at all to how a study was conducted in the US, or another study was run in Asia, that wouldn't the combined effort make sense to look at it in its totality and for consideration, and that there were statistical methodologies that let you look at that in a valid fashion. And imagine that there was harmonization of both regulatory and reimbursement clinical research needs, so that Naomi and Blue Cross and Kaiser and all the participants on both the private payer and CMS were actually getting the kinds of clinical information that they needed in combination with what the regulators needed, and wouldn't that be a more efficient process? And imagine if patient preference informing was more systematically informing regulatory decisions and product access, and we had a really good discussion about that just a little while ago. And imagine real-world evidence generation like NEST really informed device development and regulatory oversight. So I think that's the big picture of what we're trying to tackle, and so far what we've been focused on is demonstration projects that would ultimately lead to these kinds of benefits. So if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, we really could use additional sponsors, additional participants in our projects. They're up and running. They're strong forums, very collaborative, and it'd be great to have everybody's involvement. Contact me or our program manager, Dan Schwartz, after the meeting. Thank you.